My name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and I'm on a mission to rebuild and restore this 110-year-old classic sailing yacht, Tally-Ho. Last week I finished bending the beam shelf into position, and this week hopefully we're going to fasten it and start building the deck structure. Now I'm really excited and very grateful because thanks to all of your support I can finally afford to hire another shipwright to work alongside me and speed the project up. Last week I found someone who I think is a good guy for the job, and he's going to be starting here with me this week. I've also got a volunteer arriving, and because of all the craziness going on in the world right now, we decided that it would be best for these guys to stay up here so that we can keep making progress on the boat and stay in isolation as a small group. Alright, well it's time to make some bolts, and we've already cut the stock. So I've got a bit of a setup here, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to hammer the heads on these fairly quickly by using some heat. And then of course they'll go outside and be threaded. We've got about 100 of these to make by tomorrow, so I'm going to get hammering.
Now am I going to get hair and makeup treatment or what?
Have you seen my videos?
My name's Patrick Kingshill. I'm an artist. Yeah, I just came out to help out with the project and contribute back to this channel that I love. I make a lot of sculpture and work in ceramics and wood and some castable materials, but really I'm out here to try to hone my skills in woodworking, and so fortunate to be productive in this time of isolation. I mean, it's kind of a gift, you know?
Now the reason that I'm heating up the bronze as I hammer the head onto it is that as you hammer bronze, it work hardens, which means it gets harder and more brittle. Heating it up anneals it, which makes it softer again and more malleable. I try and keep it quite hot throughout the process and heat it up a little bit extra at the end, but then let it cool down on its own. And what that does hopefully is prevent it from work hardening too much and getting brittle, but it also doesn't fully anneal or soften it too much, because that could reduce the effectiveness of the head of the bolt.
What do I say?
Say that you like long walks on the beach, horseback riding.
I'm a Sagittarius.
You're a Sagittarius.
My name's Pete Stein. I'm a shipwright over in Port Townsend, Washington.
With a bit more enthusiasm now.
Oh God. Okay. All right. My name is Pete Stein. I'm a shipwright from Port Townsend, Washington. Some of you may recognize me from the Western Flyer Project. I left that job back in October to start my own boat shop in Port Townsend, and I got word that Leo is looking for a shipwright to hire. I'm quarantined over here with him and the crew, and looking forward to this project, a full restoration. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah, pumped to be here. I think between his skill and my skill and the helpers, we'll be able to get some stuff done. So good, great, grand, wonderful.
You're a natural.
Hi, Mom.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. It's like the Amish.
Well. Okay.
Are you filming or picture taking? I never know. Is that
I'm always filming.
okay.
So Pete and I have been spending a few days just getting everything dialed in and set up to fasten the beam shelf. We realised that before we make any fastenings, we actually wanted to lay out where all the deck beams are so that we know exactly how things are going to work out, how those fastenings are going to interact with the beams and with the hanging and lodging knees. But now we finally got to a place where we can actually start fastening the beam shelf into the beams, and behind me Pete is actually drilling the first hole through the beam shelf and one of the frame heads.
It's kind of like that.
Right, why don't you tell us what we're doing here?
Oh, tell us what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Well, we were lining out bolts for the beam shelf. The drawings call for where the chain plates are here. So there's 3 hanging knees for the 3 chain plates. And after looking at our deck beam line out and frame line out, we figured out that our hanging knees must have little dog legs in them, and they do. Like this one.
Out there, dude.
Goes along this frame, but comes up and goes diagonal on the deck beam, or the beam shelf, over here to deck beam 15. We had to dig this out of the pile of scrap back there to assure ourselves that that's what we were looking at. And luckily, they fit pretty well. They looks like the shape of the boat and the shape of this knee are resemble each other pretty well. So.
Like a glove.
That does it. So it's time to start making the deck beams which will support the deck and everything on it. Now most sailing yachts have what's called a constant camber in their deck. Now the camber is the amount of curve from the center of the deck at the highest point down to the outside edges of the deck. A constant camber means that curve is the same arc all the way along the boat, which makes it a lot easier to make the deck beams because you only actually have to make one pattern for almost all of the beams. The camber is measured by the rise, which is measured as a height over a certain distance, usually the beam of the boat or slightly larger. Usually on yachts that tends to be around ½ an inch per foot of the beam of the boat. So a boat with 12 foot of beam would usually have roughly a 6-inch rise in the deck camber. Now the shape of that camber, the curve of the deck beams, is a constant curve, which is an arc, a section of a giant circle. So if you took the shape of Tally-Ho's deck beams and continued that arc into a massive circle, it would make a circle with a radius of roughly 48 feet. Now the nice thing about having a constant camber is that you might have, say, 6 inches rise in the midship section of the boat, but as you go further forward or aft, the beam gets smaller, and as you're using a smaller section of your pattern, then of course the rise gets lower as well. And the result is that if you have a nice sweet shear line on the outside edges of the deck, the top of the planking, and you put each deck beam in so that the ends of the deck beam meet that shear line on either side of the boat, then you naturally get a really nice swept deck that follows the shear with a slightly more subtle curve. And the center line of the deck will create a nice fair curve. However, there is a caveat at the front of the boat where it gets very narrow. There's usually a section where that rule doesn't quite work, and there's a spot where you have to put a little extra rise into a few deck beams to build them up into a fair curve with the rest of the deck. Making the template itself is fairly easy. You just start with a straight line and then you arc off the quarter of a circle, and the radius of that circle is the same as the rise in the deck. Then you split that arc into 4 pieces and you take those measurements and space them out along your flat line, which is the beam of the boat. Join them up with a batten, and that'll give you a curve which is an arc or a section of a much larger circle. I've just been looking at my notes for a while and reminding myself which beams are supposed to come out of which pieces, and so I now need to unstack some of these flitches and offer the template up. I'm really trying to look at the curve of the grain on the flitches and trying to match that up with my template. Pancho, get up. So today I unstacked all the flitches that came from New England, and it looks like there's just enough curved pieces here for me to get every full beam in the boat with a nice sweeping grain that matches the camber of the deck. Now that's really lucky, because actually when I was at New England Naval Timbers selecting these logs, I did pick every suitable swept log that he had in the yard. What that does mean though is that there's no room for error. If I mess up any of these beams, I'll have to cut the replacement out of straight grain stock or try and get some more stock in from somewhere else. So we figured out where all the fastenings need to go through the beam shelf, and the guys have been busy drilling holes, counter boring the outside in the frames and doing the bolts up. Very soon now we're going to be starting to take off some of the clamps, and that'll be the moment of truth, as we hope that the bolts are going to keep the beam shelf nice and tight into the frames, which they should do, but it'll still be a little nerve-wracking because there's so much tension on the beam shelf trying to pull it away from the frames.
Okay, this is the tricky part.
So yesterday we finished planing both sides of the roughed out deck beams, and we just stacked them under this tarp for the night because it was raining. So today I'm going to start marking them out with the final shape of the beam.
The board around. We don't.
Hit your button there?
Hit my button there, bud.
So obviously when I put the beam shelves in, I put a lot of stress on some of the frames. Some of those were moved slightly, and so before we fastened the beam shelf, we actually re-measured and marked on the beam shelf every station. And then before we fastened each frame, we made sure to adjust its fore and aft position to make sure it was exactly on station, so in its correct place, and then the whole frame is perpendicular to the centre line and they're all evenly spaced.
Looking for all these little knots or imperfections in the frames, and I'll just be boring them out with the Forstner bit and then plugging them up with a little live oak plug. Just like this.
How's that sounding going, Cecca?
Yeah, great. Loving this. Loads of people don't know who I am anymore. They're like, who's that?
Go on then.
You're like my wonderful girlfriend.
Go on then, tell us who you are.
No.
Go on.
Who am I? Hi, I'm Cecca. There you go.
So it's been a really good couple of weeks' work. Both the guys have been working really well here, working really hard. I'm incredibly grateful for all the support of all different kinds, which has actually allowed me to take this next step of getting another shipwright involved. Pete's a really good worker. He's got a lot of energy, a lot of skill, and so far we've worked very well together, I think. So I'm really hoping that I'll be able to afford to keep him on. I never expected or even appealed for support like this, and I'm constantly amazed, surprised and delighted at the generosity of you folks out there making this project possible. And of course, the whole team here wishes everybody out there all the best in these very strange and difficult times. Stay safe, and we hope that, like us, you have an interesting and absorbing project to keep you occupied in isolation. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again.